Hey gang, before we get started, you heard me say it last week, you can help out the podcast by taking a quick survey and earning a chance to win a $100 gift card. Please go to podsurvey.com/Harris, take a survey, helps keep the show free and helps advertisers understand our audience better. And did I mention a chance to win a $100 gift card? That's podsurvey.com/HARRIS. Thank you very much. Now, let's get to the show.
It's the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, I played a little extra of the intro theme today. I had a few folks wondering what some more of the Apex Manor great song, Under the Gun, sounds like, and so I decided shake things up a little bit. I hope on a Monday morning, hearing a little extra of the theme music did not make you think that this podcast was broken. I am Chris Harris. This is the Harris Football Podcast. Thank you very much for listening. I figured we would start the show with a few suggestions from you. We asked you who would be the voice of the train in the animated movie for the little podcast that could. Stephen Niezgoda, he says the voice for the Harris Football train cast that could has to be Gilbert Gottfried, right? Paul Biederbeid says voice of the engine should be a different Christopher Walken. Andrew Jegaro says the animated voice of the little podcast that could should be John Gruden. And Sal says the voiceover for the train has to be Bobcat Goldthwait. Who else? I'm glad to hear that these are the voices that you think of when you hear the dulcet tones of yours truly. And oh, lest you think that's the end of the suggestions, don't worry, we've got your voicemails later in the show.
Today's kickoff.
A busy show today. We've got a lot of injury news to talk about and the fantasy football implications. Then I'm going to give you 5 breakout players for 2015. We will have your mailbag as well as some voicemail. And then Ross Tucker will be on, a fellow that I know from ESPN days, and subsequently Ross is building a podcast empire of his own. We're going to talk about offensive lines circa 2015 and the implications they may have for your favorite fantasy weapons.
Injury news.
Let's sift through the carnage. C.J. Anderson got his ankle rolled on and came out of the Broncos' first preseason game. But the Broncos say it's not a long-term concern. That did not stop Twitter from freaking out. I don't think that the risk here is any bigger now than it was last week, because it didn't seem to be a huge injury, but it's worth remembering that Monte Ball and Ronnie Hillman can play a little bit too. I didn't change my rank of Anderson for the moment. C.J. Spiller will miss the entire preseason after undergoing arthroscopic knee surgery. Supposedly going to be back week 1, but then again, what are the teams going to say to us here on August 17th? Obviously, there's a risk that Spiller won't, or that he won't be in game shape when he's back. I moved him down outside my top 30 running backs in standard scoring. He's down at number 26 among running backs in a PPR, and that, unfortunately, is a lower rank as a result of this injury. Kevin White's supposed shin splints have turned out to be a stress fracture. He needs surgery. He's going to have a rod inserted into his tibia. So he's out for at least the first 6 weeks of the season and possibly the entire season. Unfortunately, as much as an intriguing prospect that he is, I think you have to forget about him in all but the very deepest leagues. 10-teamers, no way. 12-teamers, I guess you can take him. But my guess is you will need that roster spot. Eddie Royal is my first candidate to benefit, and he's up to my 45th rank in my point per reception wide receiver ranks, just outside my top 50 in standard. Marcus Wilson could also be a factor. And just to make things a little worse for the Bears, Alshon Jeffrey is walking around in a walking boot with an injured calf, though apparently the suspicion is he'll only be out about a week. I did not lower Jeffrey in my ranks. Julius Thomas, out for the rest of the preseason with a fractured hand. But, surprise, surprise, the Jags are just so confident that he'll be back week 1. Again, I'm going to say, I don't know, but knowing the way these things work, there's not a lot of incentive for teams to be fully honest at this point. So there's a risk that that's wrong. But, of course, tight end isn't a scarce position, so you can still take a chance on rostering Thomas. I moved him below Jason Witten to number 7 among tight ends for me, but I'm not taking him before the 9th or the 10th round. If someone else in your drafts wants to take that chance, I say you let him. Zach Ertz needed groin surgery, out for the rest of the preseason. Guess what? The Eagles are saying he's going to be ready for week 1, and who wouldn't believe them? Obviously, we shall see. If you want to wait forever for a tight end and still take Ertz, I guess that's okay. But now he's down to number 11 on my list in a vast sea of really similar tight ends. It's hard to think that this development for Ertz is good for his prospects of stealing time from Brent Selleck. Just to round out the tight end nonsense, Logan Paulson out for the year, in addition to Niles Paul. So boy, Jordan Reed is so safe on the depth chart. But of course, he's not so safe in actual corporeal form. He is battling hamstring issues himself. He's always hurt. Very tough to trust. But unbelievably, he's now number 10 on my tight end list, which just feels wrong. Again, just wait forever. And if you take Reed, just make sure it's one of the last tight ends who are going to start in your league who get taken in your draft. Brashad Perryman, another big athletic specimen, rookie wide receiver, still hasn't practiced because of his knee injury, and you don't rule out the possibility that he does bounce right back and grow into a role that looks so valuable in that Ravens receiving core. It's tough for a rookie not to get any practice and then do that. I lowered Perryman this weekend. He's now number 43 among wide receivers, just outside my top 100 overall. Still think he probably should be taken in all leagues, but now as much more of like a high upside late round flyer. With all the Falcons running backs out with hamstring problems, Kyle Shanahan recommended a running back he knows well, Evan Royster, who was with Shanahan in Washington, out of the NFL last year, so he's got to be good. I kind of tend to doubt that he makes the team. I think he's more likely a camp body, but we can recall a month or so back in the day, a couple years ago, when he was pretty good, maybe a few years ago, actually. Nile Davis of the Chiefs was carted off the field with a knee injury, but surprise, surprise, the Chiefs are saying, day to day. For the moment, I would say Davis probably still is the Jamal Charles handcuff. DeAnthony Thomas probably would be next man up, but then again, Thomas suffered a calf injury this weekend and didn't return to the game for the Chiefs as well. Finally, Chris Johnson worked out for the Cardinals on Sunday. The suspicion is that with David Johnson still out with a bad hamstring, Arizona may just sign Johnson. That is Chris Johnson. There's an interesting potential for workload for CJ K in Arizona. But as I've said previously on the podcast, while I do think the straight-ahead speed is still there, everything else is pretty much gone, and I'm suspicious that Chris Johnson wouldn't be much fantasy use. And that, my friends, is a heck of a lot of carnage. So let's get to my 5 breakout candidates for 2015. Thursday and Friday of this week, I'm going to unveil my 10 flag players for 2015. If you're familiar with my work, you know what that means. But if you're not, it means 10 guys I'm planting my flag on. Guys, I think will outperform where they're being selected. Now, that's not quite what today's breakout list is. Today, I'm looking for 5 younger players who I think have the potential to kind of go ballistic this year. You know, combination of youth, untapped ability, potential opportunity. Now, it is definitely possible that a couple of today's names will recur and wind up on the flag list. But again, it is slightly different, more risk, but potentially more reward, and I'm not quite as concerned with value, much more with upside. So here we go. Number 5, Marvin Jones, wide receiver for Cincinnati. He missed all of last season with an ankle injury, has been limited by a hammy in training camp this year, plus 10 touchdowns in 2013 look great, but they were always a little bit suspicious. 10 touchdowns on 51 catches probably isn't sustainable. And Mohamed Sanu is a good player. It's not even a sure thing Jones earns the number 2 job in Cincinnati. But I went back and looked at Jones on tape circa 2013, and I have to say, he's legit. Speed is real. As a deep threat, he's as good as A.J. Green. Of course, he doesn't do the other stuff Green does. He doesn't have the size or the hands or sort of the overall focal point of the offense skills. But if things go right for Jones, he'll at least push Sanu into a slot role, play way more than the roughly 50% of snaps he saw 2 years ago. The best he'll be is a feast or famine number 2 wide receiver, but still, considering he's going undrafted right now in all but the very deepest leagues, I think Marvin Jones is worth a bench spot for that upside. Number 4, Lorenzo Taliaferro. Have I mentioned on any podcast that you've heard in any sort of recent memory that I'm worried about Justin Forsett? I think I've pretty much beaten that into the ground. And often I find that when I feel so concerned about a guy's injury prospects for the upcoming season, he winds up not getting hurt and submitting a really good year. But I won't go into it again. The warning signs are all there for Forsett. And I like Taliaferro. He's really about the only big body the Ravens have in their backfield that they're planning on using much. And I liked him a lot on tape. Powerful kid, but unlike a lot of power backs, he can really plant a foot, change directions, and go hard with one step. I mean, listen, he's got 68 career carries. Season ended last year with a foot injury, so I'm not going to go crazy. Plus, rookie Buck Allen is in that Baltimore backfield too. But Taliaferro's also going undrafted in a lot of leagues, and I think he should get a chance to be rostered to start the year in all leagues. My number 3 breakout player for this season, Trey Mason. Now, Mason's big flaw as a rookie was even after he took over the starting job, he only played a maximum of 37 snaps in any single game because the Rams couldn't trust him in pass protection. Sometimes that is a cliche. But in Mason's case, it was real. You watched him time and time again coming out when the Rams needed pass blocking. I have to assume that's changed. I have to assume they've coached him up, and now he's starting to figure it out. And yeah, of course, the Rams took Todd Gurley, and yes, I love Gurley's future prospects. But even the biggest Gurley booster has to admit there's a chance the Rams don't get a lot out of him this year, especially to start the season. Mason's quickness and acceleration, they're really, really good. They're just as good as someone like Andre Ellington, someone like Gio Bernard. Yes, just like with those guys, if Mason winds up the full-time back, I do worry about his health because he is a smaller guy. But considering he's going outside the ADP top 100, I think he's an upside play with some value to him. My number 2 breakout player for this season, Davante Adams of the Packers. At some point, wideouts differentiate themselves with the mental side of the game. That's an area where Adams seemed to have his stuff together right away as a rookie. You might remember a last-minute win against the Dolphins last year when Adams had the smarts to get out of bounds rather than try to score and get that winning touchdown with no timeouts left. He kind of seems to just get it, and certainly Aaron Rodgers is effusive in his praise. Of course, Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb. They are fantasy royalty right now. But Adams is going to be part of the Packers' base formations. They go three wide just about as much as anybody in the NFL. And as a result, you know Adams is going to see some singled up looks. More importantly, if Nelson or Cobb were to get hurt, Adams would be, I'd say a top 20 receiver instantly. He's not huge, he's not a burner, but he's a savvy guy when it comes to running routes. Reminds me a little bit of Greg Jennings, maybe a little bit bigger, but similar skill set. Really big upside for a guy going in the 130s overall in terms of average draft position. I think he's a top 100 player in all leagues. Which brings me to my number one breakout player of the year, and it's John Brown of the Cardinals. I've said it a bunch this summer. I'm probably very wrong on one of the Cardinals receivers. I have them all as borderline top 100 players. But if Carson Palmer is going to stay healthy and Bruce Arians is going to stay true to himself as a play caller, the volume is going to be there for at least one of these guys, right? Smokey Brown, Larry Fitzgerald, and Michael Floyd to be a bigger fantasy factor than I'm giving them credit for. You'd got to assume that someone will emerge. I just don't know which one, which is why I don't have any of them rated super high above any of the rest of them. But the one I think who has the biggest chance to really pop is John Brown. He's T.Y. Hilton. He really is. Stature, speed, but of course without Andrew Luck, which is a lot of T.Y. Hilton's appeal. Carson Palmer, a little more erratic, you would say. But John Brown on tape as a rookie, corners just absolutely could not stay with him. He's just too fast. He's little, but he's fast. And safeties continually misjudge their paths to go get him. Made a bunch of big plays last year. I think more are coming this year. Can he ever turn into a major fantasy threat every single week at under 6 feet and way under 200 pounds? It's a legitimate question, especially with two bigger guys in that receiving core. But T.Y. Hilton's smaller. T.Y. Hilton's going 24th overall among all players on average. 11th among wide receivers. Brown is going 122nd overall, 46th among wide receivers. I think it's pretty good value, but I think it's really good upside for Smokey Brown.
Time for the mailbag.
Hey, I'm pretty sure I saw Christopher Harris, but it might have also been a cheesecake with a couple blueberries on top. Either way, so sweet, so delicious. The jury's out.
So sweet, so delicious, so true. I am your correspondent, a piece of cheesecake with 2 blueberries on top. We got a couple of other sightings of me. Matt Coots writes in an email, "It was great seeing you at the IHOP last night. That was an epic midnight rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody." Rich McClone asks, "Was that you at the matinee of Fantastic Four and Mashpee?" It was not. Diddler on the Roof says, "Seriously, Chris? You don't run up to someone in Walmart, punch them in the face, and run away screaming, 'Draft Doug Martin.'" I really should not have done that. Hey, we have our second little podcast that could novelty Twitter account. Of course, the first being at Gurley's Knee. This one is at What a Trash Bag. So clearly you should be following both at Gurley's Knee and at What a Trash Bag. And at What a Trash Bag says, "Tell cousin Josh I'm here to call out all the trash bags this year." Love the show. Thank you. Patty Cronin also has cousin Josh on his mind. Cousin Josh finally stepping up his game on Friday's show, but was this week outside the standard deviation. I think it's very clear that it was. Finally, the depth of field tweets. "Did I actually hear you say that you were literally splitting the baby?" I probably did say that, but don't pay attention to anything I say. Like, ever.
Today's guest.
And today's guest is Ross Tucker, who is a former NFL offensive lineman, but that in and of itself would not particularly qualify him to be on our show. No. What qualifies Ross is that he's made the successful jump to being a great analyst. He's got the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. He's got the Fantasy Feast Podcast. He's got the Even Money Podcast, all available at rosstucker.com. Ross, thanks for being here.
Absolutely, Chris. Thanks for having me. It's been a while.
It has been a while. We are both former ESPNers, and we've done a couple of shows together, and now we are both, well, you're a podcast mogul, and I don't know, what's like the junior version of a mogul? I'm like the little bunny slope or something.
No, well, first of all, Chris, congratulations on all your success. I mean, the fact that you're doing a fantasy podcast 5 times a week is really, really impressive, and congratulations on going out on your own. Everything you're doing, with Harris Football is fantastic. I remember when you used to do the Harris Football Minute, the Harris Fantasy Football Minute, right in the middle of the Football Today podcast we used to do. But yeah, man, I love podcasts. I know this much. I'm definitely not a mogul yet. Maybe Maven. I don't know. I'm definitely not to the point of mogul yet, but I'm trying. I love the format. I love the freedom. I love the control. I love everything about it as both a producer of the content and a listener of the content. Plus, we're both Ivy League guys, so hopefully we're not the dumbest guys in the room.
Well, hopefully we're not. And today we're going to talk something I guess I get asked a lot about on Twitter is, where is the offensive line continuity? Which offensive lines do you think have gotten better or worse? And how might that impact the bottom line of my fantasy team this year? So before we start picking out some of the good ones and maybe some of the bad ones, give me some overarching thoughts on how you go about looking at offensive line and the way they impact skill players.
I'm a huge believer, Christopher, in continuity and chemistry. I think it's the most underrated aspect of offensive line play. It just feels like so often people just think it's, just take a player and plug him in. But here's what people don't understand is just like wide receivers and quarterbacks need to get on the same page, and we see that all the time in fantasy football, the same is true of offensive linemen, and I would actually say even more so because literally almost every play you are working with someone else. So you're working in tandem, in concert, whatever, and you really have to have a great feel for what the guy's doing. So we'll talk, I'm sure, about some teams that added a guy in free agency or drafted somebody in the first round. But the teams I usually like are the teams that didn't change a darn thing.
Yeah.
It's the same guys as the year before, because that means, number one, things probably went pretty decently the year before, and number two, hopefully they'll only build upon that.
Agreed. And that certainly leads you to think the Cowboys might be pretty good this year, right? Are the Cowboys still your candidate to be kind of the star makers, the king makers in fantasy this year, that offensive line?
Well, the 4 offensive lines that really kind of stand out to me the most, that I just think are a notch above, are probably the Cowboys, Ravens, Bengals, and I would just sneak the Packers in there as well.
Okay.
I mean, all of them are 4.4 yards a carry or better. All of them are 30 sacks allowed or less. And none of them are really making any changes, with the possible exception of La'el Collins beating out Ronald Leary at left guard for the Dallas Cowboys. But same guys for the Ravens. Bengals really just added depth. Think about that, by the way, Chris. How crazy that we're at the point now where the Bengals have such a good roster that their first and second round picks could be, depth players or guys for years from now along the offensive line. Never, I think we'd ever get to that point.
Yeah.
Did you?
Well, no. I mean, I understand it, though. I think, they've got Whitworth as a free agent. They've got Andre Smith as a free agent after this year. So this is probably the last year of this group in Cincinnati, but I'm with you that if I was going to list a top 5, that group would be part of it. Whitworth is just, what a good player he is. I mean, he never stands out to you as being like an athletic freak. Frankly, I think he looks slow and his drops a lot of time, but he just gets the job done no matter what. I mean, they played him at left tackle for years. They played him at right tackle when Andre Smith was hurt. He played a lot of guard last year. I want a piece of the offensive line that guy's on. He's just really good.
I love Whitworth. I always have. He is an absolutely gigantic human being. And
helps,
he does not have sort of your, I know. He's sort of, I mean, and I'm, coming from a guy like me, he doesn't have sort of your textbook left tackle feet.
Yeah.
But he's always, that gets overrated a little bit because if you're always in balance and you're always in good body position and you're smart and you have good technique, you can sort of overcome that.
Sure.
So, those, certainly the Bengals and the Packers, but literally I think those 4 teams are all returning the exact same 5 starters. I mean, they're all returning the same 5 starters. And then for the Cowboys, like I said, it's just whether or not La'el Collins gets in the mix.
Right. So do you have any concerns about the tackles? Well, I mean, I'm not crazy about the Green Bay tackles. I have to say, Josh Sitton might be the best offensive lineman in football. But Bulaga I've never loved. Bakhtiari, I guess he's all right. I feel like Aaron Rodgers gets a little more heat than he should from the outside.
Well, so I have them ranked 4th.
Okay.
And they were the last. They kind of snuck into this tier. And I think that those guys I don't think are going to be Pro Bowl players, but I think you're fine having them as your starter. I mean, to me, they're average. Maybe even slightly above average tackles.
Yeah.
If you look at it. The one thing I thought, and this is important to know, Christopher, I thought Aaron Rodgers did a much better job last year of actually getting the ball out of his hands faster and even throwing the ball away sometimes. There had always been these whispers that Aaron wouldn't throw the ball away because he was concerned about his quarterback rating. I don't know that. I never talked to him about that. But there was always those whispers. But I think my former teammate, Alex Van Pelt in Buffalo, who's now the quarterback coach in Green Bay, has really done a nice job and deserves some credit for convincing Aaron that that is the best play, that is the best move, and that will help them win games if he throws the ball away more often than he used to.
Yeah. So for those, I'm with you. You can't list the good offensive lines in the NFL and not mention the 4 that you mentioned. And if we take a step back and talk about fantasy implications for the skill position players on those 4 teams, we are talking about some of the elites. There's a good reason Justin Forsett had the year he had last year, and I have expressed very often on this podcast that I have concerns about Forsett's stature, but I don't have concerns about his line. The same thing goes with Green Bay. What an offense. The running game in Cincinnati was fantastic last year. Let's take a moment and talk about running back in Dallas, because DeMarco Murray was the fantasy MVP last year, and he's an above average player. I maintain that he's not an elite running back, but he's really good. And I think he's significantly better than anything that got left behind in Dallas. So how do you approach it, judging whether or not the quality of that line, where we all agree if they're healthy, they're the best, up against the potentially not amazing talent of a player like Joseph Randle?
I think Randall actually has pretty good talent. I guess I just wonder if he'll be able to sustain it. There's one thing in averaging 6 yards a carry or whatever he did on, in a lot of garbage time or as a change of pace guy.
Yep.
Or it felt like he always would get, they had like 3rd and 20, get 18 yards on a draw.
Yep.
Things like that. I think, Christopher, there's a total difference between that and actually being the bell cow and actually being the guy that gets that many touches. And I think that they were hoping that he and McFadden, maybe somebody else, could divvy him up. But it really doesn't look like that's going to be the case now. It really looks like you've got a problem there and that's not going to be able to happen. So as a result, it might have to be Randall that gets the load. To me, on some level, it's almost a grand experiment to see how good an offensive line really can be.
Yeah.
But I also feel like maybe, Christopher, that the Cowboys are screwing up what was an amazing, amazing thing a year ago. Because I know from talking to their coaches that there are some real concerns about Joseph Randle's maturity. And so how does that manifest itself in fantasy? Does he play third down at all? Do they trust him to catch a ball out of the backfield, or more importantly, in pass pro at all this year? Is he mature enough to do the things during the week to make sure his body's ready to carry that load every week? You know, DeMarco's a guy that was doing the cold tub, the massage, stretching, chiropractor, all those things, because he knew, A, that it was a contract year, and B, the things you need to do. I just don't know. Is Joseph Randle going to be doing those type of things or doing something else?
Right, stealing underwear. You know, I think that's the question. I mean, I listed last week a list of my 10 swing players in fantasy for 2015, which is the guys who have the widest possible variation of possible outcomes, where you wouldn't be shocked if they were unbelievable stars for fantasy, and you wouldn't be shocked if they were completely off the radar for fantasy. And my number one player of the swing variety this year is Joseph Randle, for exactly the reason you're talking about. He's got all the opportunity in the world, but he's got the potential to completely flame out. If you're in the 4th round of your fantasy draft, you taking the shot on Randle, or you letting somebody else do it?
I'm probably letting somebody else do it, although I think a case can be made because of the variance and because of the upside. I mean, if you're really trying to win your league and you're really trying to make sure you're in the playoffs, I think sometimes, you know, it pays off to take those big bets.
The upsides.
Now,
Yep,
you might lose, right?
Right.
And it might be a terrible failure, but who cares if you get 6th place in your league or 9th place? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, so upside is good, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you either win or you lose, so you might as well win, or at least try to win.
If you're not first, you're last. So let's switch it to the other side. Who are some offensive lines that you're real concerned about for this year? And, you know, then we'll talk about the corresponding skill position players who might be real problem for fantasy this year.
Well, the New York Giants, to say the least, you know, the Will Beatty injury hurt was already a line that, I mean, you take away Beatty, Christopher, and I don't think they've got an above average starter on the line.
Huh.
I'm not sure they have a guy that's average. I mean, if we term the average to be somewhere between 13th and 18th best in his position in the league, I'm not sure the Giants have an offensive line starter that's there. I think Beatty probably would have been if he had been healthy. Now they're moving these guys around. I didn't love Eric Flowers as a left tackle, his pass protection coming out of the Miami. So they got him at left tackle right now. That's concerning to me. I have heard good things about Weston Richburg and Pugh, but and the moves that those guys have made to center and left guard respectively. But we'll see. Needless to say, the Giants are a concern for me. The Buccaneers are a big concern to me. I mean, maybe starting a rookie at right guard that's from Division III. And I watch a lot of Penn State football, being a Pennsylvania guy. And Donovan Smith really disappointed me a number of times last year. And he's going to be starting as a rookie left tackle for the Bucs. So those are certainly two of the lines that stand out. I think teams like the Falcons, that's kind of a in Shanahan I trust. Titans, Lions will be better than they were last year. I think the Cardinals and the Chargers have some concerns as well, especially in the run game for both of them. You know, the Cardinals aren't sure. Bobby Massey now suspended for 3 games at right tackle. I don't know if Jonathan Cooper, I mean, they took an offensive guard number 7. You take an offensive guard, the number 7 overall pick, that guy should be awesome, and he has not been that so far.
Yeah, he should be Larry Allen, and he's not. He's definitely not Larry Allen. Let's go back to the Giants. They're the first name off your tongue when you're talking about scary offensive lines, and yet so many folks are relying on the Eli to Odell connection and hoping that Victor Cruz can come back from injury and hoping that someone emerges from a platoon-looking backfield. Specifically, I mean, Eli to Odell is going to be relied on as a huge fantasy weapon this year. Is that an area that maybe you're a little lower on Beckham than a lot of people are?
I am. I don't know. It sounds like you already knew that, but I am. And there's a couple reasons. I mean, on the flip side of all that, I don't think the Giants' defense is going to be very good. So I think they're going to be in a lot of shootouts. And that Eli's pass attempts, targets are going to be way up. I love Odell Beckham Jr., and they tell me at practice he still looks that dynamic, that unbelievable. I've got injury risk concerns with him. He's already had the hamstring 2 years in a row.
Yep.
We'll see how that manifests itself. Plus, I guess, Christopher, if he plays the way he did the last 10 weeks last year, if he does that again, then we're looking at like the best receiver of all time. And I guess I'm not ready to go there.
Yeah.
He was that good. It was that ridiculous.
How, in your experience, all right, so, there are a lot of factors that go into determining whether a wide receiver is bound for a good year, and certainly the first and foremost is talent. I care most about talent, and we both agree that Beckham has it in spades. So now there's everything else. We have to factor in maybe a lot of shootouts. Tough to say that's definite, but absolutely on the table. And then we have Eli, erratic as a quarterback, but certainly his highs are very high. How much do you factor in your worries that you've expressed really well about that Giant offensive line into worries about a receiver not living up to his billing?
Not a ton, because Eli has historically done such a good job of getting the ball out of his hands quickly. So, and I think in that offense with McAdoo, they're trying to do that even more. So it's a factor, because I think there's injury risk with Eli, even though he's never missed a game. Maybe that just means he's due, right? Mm-hmm. But I think I think it'll hurt them on some deeper routes, but they weren't a great offensive line last year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They weren't that good last year.
Yeah.
And Eli and OBJ were still able to make sweet music. So I guess my thought process is, if it didn't hurt him that, and I know they had B last year, but if it didn't hurt him that much last year, I don't know that it'll be that much of a factor this year. I mean, it probably hurts him, both their stock a little bit in my mind, but I actually feel like that gets made up for by the fact that I think the defense is worse than it was last year. So those two probably counteract each other.
Would you say it's much more worrisome for someone like Rashad Jennings?
Yes, I think that's probably pretty fair.
Yeah.
Because, 3.6 yards a carry last year. Then it looks like they still want to give Andre Williams carries. They bring in Vereen. I mean, they made Vereen a priority free agent for them. That's going to cut into Jennings' catches. So, yes, I would say absolutely for Jennings just in general, and specifically the offensive line. They might come together. They might be better than I think, but I got to believe it until I see it.
I think what our audience here cares about is how are these guys going to affect the bottom line, affect the bottom line of the skill players. And I think it's a really interesting perspective to think about passing as opposed to running, right? I mean, in general, it sounds like what you're saying is these offensive lines that concern you, the star wide receivers, you're willing to give them a pass, still draft those guys, but maybe the running backs, the Rashad Jenningses, the Doug Martins, maybe downgrade them half a step because of the lines.
Yeah, it probably manifests itself more in the run game than it does in the passing game.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to help Jameis Winston that much at all as a rookie.
Right, especially given that first preseason game in which he looked not so good. Ross, thanks very much for doing this, man. And folks should catch up with you on your many, many podcasts. Ross Tucker Football Podcast, the Fantasy Feast Podcast, and the Even Money Podcast. They can follow you on Twitter where?
It's at Ross Tucker NFL, or if they're a Facebook-only person, facebook.com/Ross Tucker NFL. And I got to get you, Christopher, to come on the Fantasy Feast podcast soon. Return the favor, little home and home series.
You know it. Scratch my back, all that stuff. We'll do it. Thanks, Ross.
Absolutely. Take care.
And that's it. That's our show. thank you very much for listening. Remember, you can go to harrisfootball.com, and I've got very regularly updated player ranks and some links to player videos. You can subscribe to the podcast, which helps quite a bit, actually. If you want to help us out here at the beginning with the little podcast that could, subscribing does help. You can write a nice review on iTunes or Stitcher or TuneIn or however else you listen. Follow us on Twitter at Harris Football. And as we did at the beginning today, here's a little extra of our end credits song, too, from the band OU Villain. Talk to you tomorrow.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The end theme is Tooth and Claw by OU Villain. Subscribe to the Harris Football Podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.